Hi, this is Brian Kim. I want to share with you this video as an update to my previous video when I showed my tips and tricks on injecting the LI61AO lens. What I didn't specify in that video is that the Bausch & Lomb LI61AO lens comes in two injector sizes. You can inject it through the EZ24 or the EZ28. And that video showed me using the EZ24, which is code word for EZ24 is 2.4 millimeter minimum incision size. You're going to see throughout this video why the lens through the EZ24 injector, the leading haptic tends to point downward. And I'm going to explain this in great detail, why this actually happens. Again, there's nothing wrong with the injector or the lens when this happens. I know I had a lot of comments on my previous video on how this looks really scary, and this might be kind of nerve-wracking because the haptic is pointed down. It might scratch the posterior capsule. I want to tell you, I did not encounter any such complications, and my conversations with the Bausch & Lomb representative confirmed to me that there was no complications when you use the injector this way, that the leading haptic can swing down like it does, but it doesn't cause any issues whatsoever with the actual delivery of the lens. And in fact, because I'm able to place this 3-piece silicone lens within the 2.4 millimeter incision, I actually prefer this injector. But because of the comments that were made, I went ahead and decided to make a new video showing the EZ28 injector through a 3 millimeter incision. But before getting to that, let's go ahead and dissect this case with the 2.4 millimeter blade using the EZ24 injector. And so again, this is from my very first video, which showed the leading haptic bending down and the optic kind of exploding into the eye. So let's go through a couple of things. Number one, I like to push viscoelastic out to gape the incision with the viscoelastic cannula. And then I slide it in, and I use that cannula through my side port incision, and I'm able to push more viscoelastic in to really expand the bag. And I think that's very important, especially if that leading haptic is going to swing posteriorly and sweep side to side. I want to make sure that capsule is pushed back all the way. Also, using that cannula allows me to release the haptic. Sometimes the leading haptic comes out kind of bent within the barrel of the injector. So as it comes out, I'm able to kind of tease it and straighten it out. But I'm going to call your attention to this. Look at the length of the barrel of the injector that's inside the eye. It is very long inside the eye, which is a very good thing. This helps to allow better control of the lens as it's being delivered into the eye. And on top of that, you can use a cannula to hold the injector into the incision, meaning you're applying constant pressure to make sure that the injector doesn't slip out of the incision. You're going to understand what I mean by that in the next case. And so take a look. You see the haptic is pointed down. You can see the haptic I have color-coded as blue. But look at the optic. The optic is bent. Look at the right side on that picture here. The red on the right side is the optic that's been bent over. So you want to think of it like a taco, okay? The taco is flat on the base, which is the optic sitting parallel to iris plane, but on the right side it's bent upward. It's bent upward as if you're folding a taco over, and because of that, the optic haptic junction is also being folded over. You can see the interface between the red and the blue, and because that optic is bent over, it causes the leading haptic to turn downward. And that's why you have that bizarre pointing of the leading haptic down towards the posterior capsule. And this is what scares people. Again, I had those comments on the video. Again, you saw that I filled the bag with cohesive viscoelastic. The bag is nice and inflated. As I'm pushing the plunger, because the optic is so compressed and the part of the optic is bending up, again, like folding a taco or a burrito and it's turning vertical, the optic haptic junction has also been rotated 90 degrees, and therefore the haptic is pointed downward 90 degrees. So again, this is just basic physics and understanding the orientation of the haptic. But you can see as the optic is delivered, it just kind of explodes, but it doesn't really do any very disruptive movements. It just explodes within the location that it is, within the capsular bag. And it explodes because, again, the injector is so small and the optic is bent so tightly that it explodes in the eye. And this is the EZ24 box. You can see it has this orange color. And again, the EZ24 box is for a minimum 2.4 millimeter incision. Again, 2.4 to 2.6. And the blue box is showing the EZ28, which again is for a minimum incision 2.8 to 3 millimeter incision. When you go on the website, this is the information that's there, but interestingly, the EZ28 and EZ24 information are flip-flopped. And so the EZ28 is actually, again, for the 2.8 to 3 millimeter incision, while the EZ24 is for the 2.4 to 2.6 millimeter incision. And I'll have to talk to Bausch & Lomb to ask them to change this on their website. So to make it simple, the EZ24 cartridge is used for a minimum of a 2.4 millimeter incision, and it has the orange box, but it also has the longer and clear tip. And what I mean by clear, if you look at the very first case on this video, I use the EZ24, and the part of the injector that goes into the eye is clear. Now you contrast that with the EZ28. It's used for a minimum of a 2.8 millimeter incision. It's the one that comes in the blue box, but you're going to see it has a shorter and frosted tip. So here are the injectors. Again, the EZ28 is from the blue box and it's on the left side of your screen, and the EZ24, it comes from the orange box and it's on the right side of the screen. You can see the plunger and the platform, the wing where you load and place the lens is all the same essentially, but at the tip you can see that the tips look very different. And so on the left side you can see it's much longer, but then the tip is shorter. But then you see on the right side, the barrel of the injector is shorter, but at the tip, it's actually longer, the part that goes into the eye. Both of them have that groove on the side, that horizontal groove. But again, getting back to my point, the left side injector, the barrel is longer, but the right side barrel is actually shorter. But then if you look at the tip itself, the part that goes into the eye is much smaller for the EZ28 as opposed to the EZ24, which is much longer. And what does that mean? You'll see that on my very first case on how the haptic kind of slipped out. The trailing haptic slips out of the eye, and therefore you have to make some adjustments. I'm placing the EZ28 injector through my 3 millimeter incision. I'm advancing the plunger. You see that the leading haptic's caught. I just release it, and the lens is going into the bag. The leading haptic's going into the bag, and the optic comes out beautifully, slow, and planar. And so that's the thing that everyone's been looking for. And you got this very slow and planar delivery of the optic. It doesn't explode in the eye like it does with the EZ24. I withdraw the plunger and I push it forward, but look, and you see, it just kind of slipped out. The trailing haptic slipped out. And I think it's because I didn't apply that force using the cannula to make sure that the injector is really abutted against the incision so that that trailing haptic wouldn't slip out. And so I was mindful moving forward to make sure I keep that cannula, using the force of the cannula to keep the injector abutted on the incision. And this is here, it's just simply showing I'm using the 3 millimeter blade as a diamond blade, burp some viscoelastic out, placing the cannula through the side port, very gently sliding the injector in. Because I have that viscoelastic, it gapes the wound a little bit. I'm pushing with my thumb on the plunger. The leading haptic comes out beautifully, nice. I tuck the leading haptic into the bag, and the optic comes out nice and straight and nice and smooth. Withdraw the plunger, engage the trailing haptic. The trailing haptic bends on itself, and it tucks right in. This is the next case. Again, I'm using a 3 millimeter blade. I make a vertical groove, place the blade into the deep part of the groove. And in this case, you're going to see I'm going to very carefully try to make this a 2.8 millimeter incision. So I wiggle, 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 and I try not to place the blade all the way in, and then I pull out. And I do this because I'd rather have a tighter incision, because I don't like really big incisions, because during the case, a lot of fluid can leak out. And here you can see I'm showing the entire injector system. And you can see the leading haptic is pointed straight. So I've done all the proper things to get this lens delivered properly. Again, you can see the overall barrel of the injector is longer with this, the EZ28 versus the EZ24, but the part that goes into the eye is much shorter. So I'm using some opposing force with the cannula to keep that tip against the incision. Push some viscoelastic in. The leading haptic goes into the bag. I'm pushing and pushing and pushing, and then the optic opens up beautifully. Again, very controlled and nice and planar. I withdraw the plunger, engage the trailing haptic, tuck it, and it goes right into the bag. And this is the next case. Again, this is a frosted tip. You know this is the EZ28 because it has a frosted tip. It has that really long shaft. But again, the part that goes into the eye is shorter on this frosted tip, again indicating the EZ28 injector. Burp some viscoelastic out, create a little bit of a gape, place the injector in using my side port with the cannula to hold the injector against the incision. I'm delivering with the plunger, pushing, making sure the leading haptic goes into the bag right there. Just tuck it into the bag. As I advance the plunger very slowly, the optic releases in a planar configuration, very controlled, very smooth. I withdraw the plunger, engage the trailing haptic, and as I advance it, it tucks the trailing haptic and it goes right into the bag. And this is the next case. I again burp some viscoelastic from the incision, place the cannula through the side port, go ahead and place the injector in. But you see what I'm doing here? I didn't have my thumb on the plunger. I wasn't holding the injector properly, and so I'm kind of finagling around. So it's very important making sure your pointer finger and middle finger are holding the barrel of the injector and making sure your thumb is behind the plunger. So I release that leading haptic and using the cannula, deliver the optic, and it comes out nice and smooth and nice and planar. I advance and nudge with the plunger, getting the whole optic in underneath the anterior capsule. I withdraw and engage the trailing haptic, and as it goes in, it collapses on itself and tucks right into the bag. Next case, I burp some viscoelastic out, place the frosted, short, tipped EZ28 injector in, using the cannula to push some more viscoelastic in to deepen the bag, and then also to release the leading haptic because it's tucked on itself. Deliver the leading haptic into the bag, keeping the injector abutted to the wound, using the cannula. Delivering the optic comes out nice and smooth, nice and planar, and then I advance it some more into the bag. I withdraw the plunger and then engage the trailing haptic, which I'm able to tuck and then place into the capsular bag. And this is the next case, again burping some viscoelastic in, placing the injector into the incision, placing the cannula through my side port, pushing some viscoelastic to fill the bag, pushing with the plunger, releasing the leading haptic, which is stuck a little bit, and then pushing, and the optic comes out nice and straight, nice and planar, nice and smooth. Withdraw the plunger again, engaging the trailing haptic, advancing it, and tucking it into the bag. Very consistent. Again, the biggest thing people worried about was the optic exploding into the eye and also the leading haptic pointed down towards the posterior capsule. You have not seen that happen at all with any of these cases. But look at this. This is the very last case, and this shows that even with the EZ28 injector, you can get the leading haptic pointed down. And so now it's not so aggressive compared to the EZ24, but you can see the configuration. The blue haptic is pointed down, but you can see there's a little bit of a tuck of that optic on the right side, and because it's folded over again like that taco, it's causing that leading haptic to point down. But luckily, because the optic is not so compressed in this EZ28 injector compared to the EZ24, as the optic is delivered, it writes itself up very quickly. So you're not going to see this wide excursion of the leading haptic sweeping around on the posterior capsule. It's going to write itself fairly quickly as I advance the optic. That right side of the optic haptic junction that's bent up sideways 90 degrees, it's going to level out as soon as I nudge a little bit with the plunger, and it straightens up nicely. It goes into the bag. The optic comes out beautifully, nice and planar. I advance the optic a little bit more, making sure that the entire lens is in the bag. I withdraw the plunger and then engage the trailing haptic, which I'm able to tuck within the bag. Even with the EZ28, you can see a little bit of that turning of that leading haptic also. In some people have described seeing that with this, but not so aggressively. And I think that's the difference. With the EZ24, because it's a much smaller injector, the optic is being compressed so much, so you have much more folding of that optic on that right side. And because it's folded so much more, that leading haptic is bent more aggressively downward. Again, because the optic is folded 90 degrees, therefore the haptic is bending down 90 degrees. Of course, it rights itself up as the optic comes out. Same thing happened in this case with the EZ28, but because it doesn't compress it as much, you didn't see as aggressive of a turning of that leading haptic downward. And so overall, with all these cases that I've done, I have had excellent control of the leading haptic. Again, not much swinging of the leading haptic as opposed to the EZ24. The optic opens up nice and planar. It didn't open up aggressively. It came out nice and smoothly. I was able to tuck the trailing haptic in, engaging it with the plunger. You saw the very first case where the trailing haptic came out of the incision. And again, that's because I didn't have the injector abutted against the wound so well. Some people could just push it against the eye. I guess they can just push the injector against the eye, but I prefer to use that cannula to provide counterforce so I can control the eye much better. So again, I love using the cannula. One, I'm able to burp the viscoelastic from the wound. I'm able to place the injector nice and smooth because the wound is gaped a little bit. And I use that cannula again to push some more viscoelastic to deepen the capsular bag. And then if the leading haptic is kind of stuck within the incision, I can release the leading haptic so it comes out straight. And then I'm able to then control the optic using the cannula in some situations. And then more importantly, I'm able to provide that counterforce. So as I'm pushing that plunger in, I make sure that the injector is abutted against the incision. And this allows the optic to come out, which in this cases came out really smoothly in a planar configuration. It wasn't very abrupt, as opposed to the EZ24, which is much more abrupt. And then I was able to, again, withdraw the plunger and tuck that trailing haptic into the bag. So again, I made this video to clarify for all the people who are worried that this lens is a great lens. You don't have this wild swinging of the leading haptic with the EZ28 injector. The optic comes out nice and slow, but you have to use a 2.8 to 3 millimeter incision for this injector. And again, this is the blue box with the frosted tip on the injector, but again, it's a short tip, and that's why I like to have that counterforce to keep that injector against the incision as you're delivering it. Again, to be honest, I still prefer the EZ24 injector using my 2.4 millimeter incision. I don't like widening incisions, and I don't like big incisions, and so I love that smaller injector. I know I might be in the minority because some people are uncomfortable with the leading haptic swinging, and they're uncomfortable with the optic shooting out so quickly. I've used this lens now in about 100 cases. Again, all of the lenses have gone in beautifully. I have not encountered any complication with regard to the delivery of the lens. So I want everyone out there to be very confident that this lens is safe, easy to use, and you can use it either using a 2.4 millimeter incision or a 2.8 millimeter incision. Again, using the EZ24 versus the EZ28 injector, respectively. So I hope this was helpful to you, and I thank you for your attention.